Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman is a must-read for anyone interested in psychology and behavioral economics. The book offers an invaluable insight into the psychological processes that influence decision-making, offering advice on how to make sound decisions based on rational thought. It also explores the often irrational nature of human behavior and sheds light on why we make certain choices even when we know better. By understanding these psychological processes, readers will have greater success in making wise decisions and avoiding costly missteps. In addition, Thinking Fast and Slow provides riveting stories that help illustrate its key points in an entertaining way. If you're looking to gain a deeper understanding of the subtle nuances behind our everyday decisions, then Thinking Fast and Slow is an essential read. Idea 1. Your thought process and mental activity are governed by two interconnected brain systems. It has been proven by psychologists Keith Stanovich and Richard West that humans use two distinct modes of thought. System 1 is in charge of quick, effortless operations that require very little effort on the part of the user. System 2 is responsible for directing one's focus toward any mental activity that requires conscious effort. By consciously or unconsciously segmenting complex work into manageable chunks, humans protect their brains from becoming overwhelmed. The reason for this is that it is human nature to favor the easiest or least laborious course of action. Controlling, monitoring, and overseeing suggestions and behaviors from System 1 is a fundamental role of System 2 in the human mind, which helps maintain a state of mental equilibrium. However, no evidence supports this course of action, which instead relies on trust and gut instinct. System 1 typically packages the data it sends to System 2 in the form of impressions. Beliefs are formed from these initial impressions. Beliefs lead to actions, which in turn shape your sense of self. The brain is designed to cope with fast-paced situations and high levels of pressure. You act differently when you have to exert mental effort, therefore, this is where cognitive ease comes into play. System 1 also plays a role in molding your sense of what's typical, what catches you off guard, and what's to blame for these reactions. However, it is important to keep in mind that System 1 may not always arrive at the correct conclusion based on the input it is given. It draws its own conclusions without regard to how accurately the data is evaluated. When you're at a dead end trying to solve a problem, System 2 goes to work trying to come up with a way out. When System 1 encounters a challenging situation for which it has no solution, it will activate System 2 to help it identify a workaround as soon as possible. However, there are situations when your brain tricks you into thinking a task is easier than it actually is. The brain does this so that it uses as little energy as possible to carry out an action. Therefore, if System 1 is confident in its ability to solve a given issue, it will not engage or request assistance from System 2. These two systems cooperate to improve your ability to complete activities and make choices. Idea 2. System 2 has maximum capacity. There is a certain amount of mental energy that can be allocated to System 2 processing, meaning that you can't multitask too many challenging mental tasks. As an example, solving a multiplication issue while handling traffic on a busy highway is extremely difficult because of this constraint. This restriction holds true even when tasks are performed sequentially, as earlier use of System 2 resources can result in lower inhibitions later in the day. For instance, after a long day at work, you could be more prone to making a hasty purchase from a late-night infomercial. A similar idea is that of ego depletion, or the belief that one's capacity for self-control or positive thought is finite and subject to daily drain. The mental and emotional and physical exertions we make on our own appear to draw at least in part from the same reservoir of available resources. The effects on stamina from suppressing feelings while watching a sad movie are real. Those who are able to memorize a string of 7 digits are more inclined to give in to more indulgent sweets. Idea 3. System 1 is an associative one. Imagine your thoughts as a large web of interconnected nodes and arcs in your brain. These concepts could be either definite or nebulous. The concepts may be connected to mental or emotional states or actual bodily experiences. Like a pebble thrown into water, the activation of a single node in a network causes a ripple effect that affects all of the nodes in its vicinity. Check out these 2 words as an illustration. The phrase "bananas throw up." Reading those 2 words may have prompted a flurry of thoughts in that split second. It's possible that, without you realizing it, your mind has wandered to thoughts of yellow fruit, a physiological aversion in the pit of your stomach, the last time you threw up, or other disorders. Words can spark off a chain reaction of associations. First, an emotion is stirred up, then a facial expression, then a reaction, and finally a new idea is formed. There are a few different ways that thoughts are connected to one another. Lemons are yellow and sour because their qualities are related to the fact that they are fruits, and this relationship between cause and effect holds true across categories. Idea 4. You're more inclined to make decisions based on your personal biases and gut instincts than on objective evidence. You tend to draw hasty conclusions about situations from the samples supplied. This reasoning holds true for numbers as well. You'd assume that a tiny population is represented by a sample with a small number. If you hear that 5 million Bulgarians are employed by the government, you could assume that the country has a small population. Some of the factors that influence how you interpret your surroundings include those listed above. What the number stands for serves as an anchor for the human mind when assigning value. The fate wheel created by Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman is set to land on either 10 or 65. In order to conduct their study, they recruited students from the University of Oregon. Each participant was asked 2 questions after spinning a wheel programmed to stop at either 10 or 65. Are there more or fewer Africans serving at the United Nations than the percentage you just wrote down? We want to know, given the number of UN member states, what do you think the African representation is like? Participants relied their answers on the number on the wheel despite the fact that it had no bearing on the question, even if the wheel hadn't been manipulated. The amount they wound up with at the roulette table served as a solid foundation for their total. Those with 10 picked lower figures for the African countries, while those with 65 picked larger ones. The frequency of an occurrence is generally estimated based on how quickly an example can be thought of. As soon as a case in point occurs to you, your mind starts piecing together other cases in which something similar happened, leading you to incorrectly assume that this type of thing happens frequently. An unexpected occurrence causes a surge in demand for that particular class for a short time. Your opinion of train travel may change temporarily if there is a high-profile accident. Your perception of rail travel will change as you are led to believe that accidents like the one you saw on TV happen all the time. Idea 5. When something goes well, people tend to assume that everything leading up to it went well too. You may think you have a good understanding of your past, but most accounts you've heard focus solely on the culmination of the process rather than its antecedents. Belief is the most common source of validation. Humans have a tendency to justify their beliefs despite a lack of proof due to peer pressure, social conformity, and blind faith. Being sure of something doesn't make it so, rather it indicates that your System 1 has found it simple to draw conclusions about the topic at hand. System 1 uses the "what you see is all there is" WYSIATI strategy when it wants to be lazy. The biases inherent in human judgment are maintained by the perception of validation. Formulated, well-organized first impressions are preferable to improvised ones. It's best to trust a map that supports your impressions rather than your gut when possible. Using a formula as a guide will help you approach a problem objectively, but relying on your intuition can only lead to biased decisions. Trusting one's gut instinct is commendable in normal circumstances. However, whenever circumstances shift, it's time to be extra cautious and fact-based. Since your intuition is predicated on your prior experiences, it is not prudent to rely on it when adjusting to a new situation where you must acquire new knowledge. It is not necessary to merely consider the best-case scenario. It is human nature to base project planning, initiation, and completion on optimistic assumptions and narratives. Mastering optimism as a tool for warding off uncertainty is a skill worth cultivating. Having an attitude that rejects uncertainty can lead to both self-assurance and arrogance. Using a premortem approach can help you maintain a reasonable level of hope. By doing a premortem, you may plan for the worst-case scenario and proceed accordingly. Assuming the project has failed forces your mind to work tirelessly to identify its causes. Doing so will likely reveal flaws and weaknesses that you can address. Idea 6. Heuristics. The mental shortcuts that allow us to make snap judgments. Sometimes in life, we have to make snap decisions. For this reason, our brains have evolved a system of mental shortcuts that allow us to quickly grasp certain aspects of our environment. These are called heuristics. Our minds have a tendency to rely too heavily on these processes, even though they are usually quite useful. We err when we try to use them in contexts where they aren't appropriate. The substitution heuristic and the availability heuristic are only 2 examples of the numerous sorts of heuristics that exist and the types of errors that can be made when using them. By using this heuristic, we may provide a simpler response to the question asked. Consider this inquiry. That woman is running for sheriff. In your opinion, how effective do you think she will be as president? Sometimes, when we're stumped, we'll ask ourselves something simpler, like, does this woman look like someone who will make a good sheriff? Instead of digging into the candidate's history and platform, we may use this heuristic to quickly assess whether or not this woman fits our preconceived notion of what makes a good sheriff. Even though the woman has years of expertise fighting crime and would be the ideal choice, we can reject her if she does not conform to our vision of a sheriff. The next heuristic is the availability heuristic, in which you overestimate the likelihood of something because it is easy to recall or because you hear it frequently. In spite of the fact that strokes are a leading cause of mortality, One survey indicated that 80% of respondents believed they would die in an accident rather than from a stroke. This is because we are more likely to hear about accidental deaths in the media and are more likely to be affected by them. We are more likely to recall hearing about awful accidental deaths than hearing about fatalities caused by strokes, and as a result, we may react inappropriately to the former. Idea 7. Why our inability to grasp statistics causes us to suffer needlessly. Exactly how can one determine whether or not a given event will occur? One useful strategy is to always remember where you started. The term statistical base is used to describe the foundation upon which additional statistical measures are built. Imagine a major taxi service with 20% yellow cabs and 80% red cabs. That works out to a 20% base fare for yellow cabs and an 80% fare for red cabs. If you want to take a stab at guessing the color of the taxi you ordered, all you have to do is keep in mind the starting rates. Therefore, it is imperative that we always keep the base rate in mind while making any kind of prediction. It's quite typical for people to overlook the base rate. We tend to ignore the base rate because our attention is drawn away from what is most likely and instead placed on what we expect to happen. Think about those taxes again, for instance. If you see 5 red cabs in a row, you might start to think the next one will be yellow just for a change of pace. However, if we recall the base rate, we will see that the probability that the next cab will be red remains at roughly 80% regardless of how many cabs of either hue pass us by. When we look for a taxi, for example, we usually just look for the one thing we know to be there, a yellow cab. One common error when dealing with statistics is to ignore the base rate. It's hard for us to keep in mind that everything eventually tends to average out. This is the recognition that everything has an average status and that deviations from that average will tend back toward the average over time. A football striker's coach might be pleased with her if she scores 10 goals in September, but he or she might be criticized if she only averages 5 goals per month for the remainder of the year. However, the forward is only regressing to the mean and hence does not merit such criticism. Idea 8. Imperative past. Why it is that we learn more from our memories than from our experiences themselves. Our thoughts do not keep records of events in a linear fashion. Our 2 memory cells each have their own unique ways of recalling past events. The first type of self is the experiencing self, which keeps track of immediate emotions. The question it poses is, how do you feel right now? Then there's the part of you that remembers what happened and writes it all down. Overall, how would you rate it? The feelings we have during an event are always the most correct, so the narrative given by the experiencing self is more reliable. However, our memories are dominated by our remembering self, which is less reliable since it records events only after they have already occurred. One's remembering self overpowers one's experiencing self for 2 main reasons. The first is termed duration neglect, and it occurs when one remembers only a portion of an experience rather than the entire thing. And then there's the peak end rule, in which the final moments of an event are given extra weight. Consider this study, which evaluated participants' recollections of experiencing discomfort during a colonoscopy, as an illustration of the remembering self's preeminence. Patients were divided into 2 groups before their colonoscopies. Those in one group underwent lengthy operations that lasted several hours, while those in the other group underwent shorter procedures that became more painful as they progressed. It stands to reason that individuals who had to go through a more drawn-out procedure would be the most miserable overall. This is how they must have felt at the moment. When asked how much pain they were in during the treatment, patients whose procedures took longer received honest feedback from their experiencing selves. On the other hand, those who went through the quicker but more painful process reported feeling the worse after the encounter when their remembering selves took over. This poll provides us with an excellent illustration of duration neglect, the peak end rule, and the fallibility of human memory. Idea 9. Relationship between System 2 related capacity and mental prowess. Is there a correlation between self-control and intelligence, given that the mental resources required for both are shared? Children who were able to wait pleasure for longer had much better SAT scores, educational attainment, and body mass index as adults, as demonstrated by Walter Mischel's now famous marshmallow experiment. People with lower scores on the cognitive reflection test are more prone to act impulsively, whether that's paying more for overnight shipping or being impatient about getting a raise. The gambler's fallacy, the belief that an event's frequency would decrease if it occurs more frequently than usual in the present, and the sunk cost fallacy are more common among low scores. It seems that, like most things, executive control can be traced back to both biological and non-biological factors, parenting techniques. Idea 10. Associations. The point of making connections is to anticipate and assess the degree of surprise associated with a phenomenon that has recently become more probable. System 1 is more likely to rely on intuition and discover errors the less they are surprised by events and the more external inputs are associated with each other and with your internal thinking. Put another way, how many of each sort of animal did Moses bring aboard the ark? The right answer is none, because Noah was the one who rounded up the animals and loaded them into the ship. However, the inclusion of animals, Moses, and the ark established a religious idea. The name Moses did not come as a surprise. Say instead, how many of each species of animal did Kanye West bring into the ark? And the facade crumbles. Because the name Kanye West is so out of place with the topic of animals in an ark, it causes System 2 to be activated. Idea 11. Normative. System 1 keeps track of what's typical and what isn't in your reality. Abnormalities can be picked up on just milliseconds after they occur. Within 0.02 of a second, your brain activity will surge if you hear someone with a posh English accent say, "I have a massive tattoo on my rear end." Given the extensive background knowledge required to spot the anomaly that wealthy individuals rarely get tattoos, this is surprisingly quick. Norms and commonly held information are also important means of communication. You recognize that when I say table, I mean an inanimate object with a flat top and no more than 25 legs. Your instant subconscious connection is made by your System 1 brain. Idea 12. When it comes to making forecasts, how accurate are predictions? As Kahneman points out, though, being unbiased isn't always the most important factor. Over-reliance on statistics would prevent the forecasting of unusual or extreme events from uncertain data. For instance, venture capitalists earn returns on their investments by betting on the success of a small number of enterprises. It's crucial for them to make sure they don't miss out on the next Google, since they can lose only a single time their investment in a bad investment, but gain 1,000 times their investment in a good one. But if investors use the type of quantitative research described above, they may become paralyzed by the high startup failure rate that serves as their starting point. Some persons who are paralyzed by too much information may benefit more from skewed, too positive data. In a similar vein, there are occasions when you know the evidence is against you but the decision still feels right, such as when you know the divorce rate is high but are still planning to get married. Perhaps under these situations, it would be best to tell oneself an outlandish story, such as "our marriage is going to defy the odds." It's easier and more enjoyable to follow our instincts than to consciously fight them. But at the very least, realize what you don't know and what assumptions you're making. Idea 13. Error in planning. Another similar problem is the planning fallacy, in which people routinely fail to account for the full scope of effort and time that will be needed to complete a project. Rather than providing a confidence range, best-case scenario estimates are more common when providing project estimates. You don't account for the unknowns such as emergencies, a lack of enthusiasm, or unforeseen roadblocks. Kahneman describes a curriculum committee meeting in which a book is planned. They look forward to the book's completion in 2 years' time and give themselves that estimate. Kahneman next inquires to the editor as to the average time it has taken other groups. The correct answer is between 7 and 10 years, with 40% of teams failing to complete their projects altogether. Kahneman follows up by inquiring about how their team performs in comparison to the others. If you want to know the truth, Kahneman's crew is worse than average. This was a mind-blowing illustration of the possibility that someone is carrying pertinent numbers in her head but willfully forgets to use them when needed. In fact, it took 8 years to write the book. Idea 14. Happiness in 2 ways. In Chapter 5, the authors stop talking about cognitive biases and errors and start talking about what makes people happy. It's hard to say what happiness is. There is happiness in the here and now, and there is satisfaction in life. Being happy and remembering being happy are 2 different things. Think about how terrible it would be to have to get several painful shots every day. Because you never get used to them, each shot hurts just as much as the last. Which one is the most important change? Attempts dropped from 20 to 18 fewer chances, from 6 to 4. You probably thought the second one was much more important, since it tries so hard to be painless. But Kahneman didn't know how to explain this. Even if you take 2 shots, that's still just 2 shots. There is less pain, so the 2 choices should be compared more closely. Kahneman thinks that someone is being stupid if they pay more or less for the same increase in utility. Kahneman's study of what makes people happy and what makes them unhappy started with a thought experiment. Idea 15. Experiencing self is remembering self. Kahneman gives us 2 sides of himself. The person who feels happiness and sadness in the present, the self who is experiencing. The easiest way to figure out this value is to keep track of how happy and satisfied people are over time and add up their scores. In calculus, this is the same thing as integrating the area under the curve. The remembering self is the person who thinks about their past and tries to figure out what it all means. The part of us that remembers is one of the most important parts of how we think. After some time has passed, while we think about our past lives, we are left with only the self that remembers. Most of the time, the person who remembers the past is the one who makes decisions about the present and the future. But there are two big ways in which the judgments of the experiencing self are different from those of the remembering self. The total score is found by adding the ratings for the best and worst parts of the experience. During a trip, it doesn't pay much attention to the middle. How well someone remembers an event has little to do with how long it's been since it happened. Both effects are typical of System 1, since they are based on norms and averages instead of sums. Because of this, we might realize that our preferences don't really match up with what we're interested in, which could lead us to have preferences that our experiencing self would find strange. Idea 16. Apparent outliers. It's important to remember that the rules we set up will always have exceptions. If duration neglect is so strong, why does it feel like a 24-hour labor is worse than a 6-hour labor? Why does going on a trip for 6 days seem better than going on a trip for only 3 days? A mother feels more helpless after 24 hours than after 6 days, and a person feels more calm after 6 days on vacation. Kahneman says that this is because the extra time changes what the end result will be. Idea 17. Happiness. All things considered, should we give more weight to the self that remembers or the self that is in the present? Although he does not provide a definitive solution, Kahneman makes it obvious in thinking, fast and slow, that we shouldn't prioritize either our memory or our experience. The avoidance of pain can be avoided by ignoring the remembering self. Our memories are flawed due to the peak end rule and the tendency to forget details during shorter time periods. The remembering self would rather have a short burst of great happiness than a steady state of mild happiness. When a bad conclusion is inevitable, the remembering self avoids pleasant moments for as long as possible. In the worst case, the remembering self would have to go through decades of pain before finally feeling happiness in the moments before dying. If just the experiencing self is cared for, then all pleasant moments are treated the same, without regard to their potential future utility. If just the experiencing self is cared for, then all pleasant moments are treated the same, without regard to their potential future utility. Some people's memories are more helpful than others. How we perceive upcoming moments might also be affected by what happens in the present. Learning a new instrument or piece of music can help you for the rest of your life. A terrible event can cause people to suffer for the rest of their lives and give them PTSD. If you start making money now, it can lead to exciting opportunities for you in the future. In its most extreme form, the experiencing self would only care about getting the most pleasure out of the present moment and would completely ignore the future self. The interests of the remembering self and the experiencing self do not always match. Thus, both must be taken into account. It's not clear which should come first when dealing with the whole population, especially when it comes to healthcare. Should we take measures to lessen people's suffering or address the issues that people are ready to pay the most to get resolved? All of these issues are worthy of further thought and study in the fields of philosophy and science. Idea 18. Formulas are more accurate than our gut feelings. It's common for humans to have to make calls based on large, complex datasets. Employers have to hire people, while doctors have to diagnose, social workers have to evaluate foster parents, banks evaluate businesses' risks, and so on. Unfortunately, human beings are shockingly lousy at making the right prediction. In every study, algorithms perform better than or just as well as human predictors. And even if human performance is equaled by an algorithm, the algorithm will still win due to its low cost. Then why do people act so bad? To put it simply, people make things harder than they need to be. They place too much emphasis on factors that have nothing to do with performance, like whether they like the person in an interview. They overcomplicate things by thinking about unusual combinations of features when standard weighted features will do just fine. Their judgment changes from one situation to the next in a way that doesn't stand out. System 1 is easily swayed by external factors without any prior awareness on the part of the conscious mind. A person's choices may be affected by what's going on around them, how they're feeling, how hungry they are, or what they've learned recently. Algorithms don't make machines hungry. For instance, when radiologists reread the same X-ray, 20% of the time they come to a different conclusion. Even when given formula data, people are terrible. They think wrongly that they can override the formula because they have seen something strange that the formula doesn't account for. Even the most simple algorithms can be very good at making predictions. Multiple regression formulas aren't the only way to do things. Formulas where each factor is given the same amount of weight can be just as accurate. Some examples of astonishing accuracy achieved by relatively straightforward algorithms are provided below. How can you tell if a marriage will last or not? Divide the number of sexual encounters by the number of fights. When it comes to determining whether or not a newborn is sick and in need of medical attention, how can this be? Doctors used to rely a lot on their own bad judgment. In its place in 1952, Dr. Virginia Apgar developed the Apgar score, a straightforward system that considers 5 variables such as the patient's skin tone and heart rate. In fact, it's still widely used nowadays. How well can you guess how much a bottle of wine will cost? Wine experts used to open bottles, taste the wine, and then guess how much it was worth. Instead, the economists relied on just 2 factors: the summertime temperature and the vintage's rainfall. The results were more precise than those of people, but the wine industry was shocked. How can you price the wine without tasting it? The formula worked better because it didn't take into account what each person wanted. There is still a stigma around the idea that algorithms made by robots will soon be in charge of every part of human life. People in the workforce who rely on their gut feelings to make predictions are understandably upset by the rise of algorithmic decision-making in their field. They think that because many of their predictions come true, they must be smart. The problem is that they don't know where their knowledge ends and their ignorance begins. It seems more tragic that a computer program killed a child than that a person made a mistake. Algorithms are slowly losing their bad reputation as they help us make smart purchases and put together winning baseball teams based on their suggestions. Idea 19. An alternative to going with your gut. Kahneman suggests standardizing the interview process. Make a short list of up to 6 qualities you think are important for you to do well in the job. These traits should be different from each other and overlap only a little. Construct specific questions to evaluate each quality. Try to exercise as little judgment as possible. The question, "How many times were you late to work in the past month?" is a good example of a conscientiousness assessment question. Make a scoring scale of numbers from 1 to 5 and explain in detail what each number means. When you do an interview, focus on getting information about one trait at a time. In the end, you should hire the person with the most points. Don't let the halo effect or bias get the best of you by breaking this rule to help someone else. Idea 20. When is it safe to rely on your instincts? It seems that a big chunk of the population learns to trust their intuition. Both chess players and doctors can do a good job of figuring out what's going on. Naturalistic decision-making, NDM, is a school of thought in academics that places value on gut instinct. When should you rely on your gut? Kahneman states that it is in situations with 2 requirements that humans acquire their intuitive abilities. A setting that is consistent enough to make accurate predictions with immediate reactions to actions. It takes work to learn these patterns. Instances of this can be seen below. 1 can teach anyone to drive. There is a direct link between what you do and what you get out of it. Because more tests give quick feedback on the real diagnosis, doctors can learn to make a diagnosis with less information. Words and thoughts can also be used for theoretical training. Rehearsals and simulations in your mind are powerful ways to learn. In the military, for example, a new commander who's going through a ravine for the first time may feel nervous because he has been told that this is a great place for an ambush. Even though Kahneman agrees with the NDM camp that formulas don't find new important factors that people miss in cases with clear signals, he still thinks the NDM camp is wrong. The human brain is a powerful learning machine, and most of the time, we don't ignore clear signs. But when it comes to finding signals in a chaotic environment, algorithms are better than humans. When and where in the brain do we get the information we need to make good intuitive decisions? They come from System 1's ability to match patterns, where the right answers are found and used. Then System 2 looks at it and makes changes to fix its flaws until it's good enough. If the answer doesn't work, we try to find another one and try again. Idea 21. Kindness. When a person has access to so much spiritual information, they are more likely to be self-centered. It's possible that our ideals will start to be more important than the needs of the people around us. But making our own choices can never make us feel better or satisfy our longings. How you use that knowledge is much more important. Silence is never a reason to ignore what's going on around you. Instead, it should be made into a resource that everyone can use. By using what you know and have done, you can help people in many ways. If someone does nice things for other people often, their mood is likely to get better. As a result, a person who makes good use of their body, mind, and spirit is less likely to make bad use of those same parts of themselves. Virtue is neither an abstract idea nor a sideshow. We shouldn't try to get rich or powerful by making ourselves better. We should do these things to make our lives, ourselves, and the world around us better. Every time we talk to or touch another living thing, we get closer to that goal. This doesn't mean that every good thing you do needs to stand out. A simple smile or act of kindness could mean as much to someone as something big. Try things that make you nervous. Try to do things that are hard. Help other people more than you help yourself. These are the things that will bring you peace and happiness in the long run. Don't just talk about having good intentions and never follow through on them. If you don't speak out against wrongdoing, you'll end up on the same side as the people you're trying to stop. Even though you will often fall short of your own goals, you should use these times to push yourself to improve. In the end, you should always do kind things when you can. If you don't, you will still have to learn to accept yourself. Okay, let's sum it all up. These are all the main ideas of the book Thinking, Fast, and Slow. Idea 1. Your thought process and mental activity are governed by two interconnected brain systems. Idea 2. System 2 has maximum capacity. Idea 3. System 1 is an associative one. Idea 4. You're more inclined to make decisions based on your personal biases and gut instincts than on objective evidence. Idea 5. When something goes well, people tend to assume that everything leading up to it went well too. Idea 6. Heuristics. The mental shortcuts that allow us to make snap judgments. Idea 7. Why our inability to grasp statistics causes us to suffer needlessly. Idea 8. Imperative past. Why it is that we learn more from our memories than from our experiences themselves. Idea 9. Relationship between System 2 related capacity and mental prowess. Idea 10. Associations. Idea 11. Normative. Idea 12. When it comes to making forecasts, how accurate are predictions? Idea 13. Error in planning. Idea 14. Happiness in two ways. Idea 15. Experiencing self is remembering self. Idea 16. Apparent outliers. Idea 17. Happiness. Idea 18. Formulas are more accurate than our gut feelings. Idea 19. An alternative to going with your gut. Idea 20. When is it safe to rely on your instincts? Idea 21. When not to trust your gut.